The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. As we talked about last week, one of the religious parallels to the near-death experience is the path to the afterlife, as described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And like the NDE, the book describes the journey the soul takes and what it may encounter along the way. Well, our return guest today, Susan Griffith-Jones, has been studying the psychological implications for life in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and is looking at new technology to present the contents of the book and what it means in a deeply meaningful and high-tech way. So, Susan, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Hi, and I hesitate to say good evening to you, Lee, because as we've talked about on the show last week, I am actually talking to you from the Indian Himalayas, and it's 9:30 at night here, whereas over in Eastern Coast America, you're still having your probably second or third cup of coffee by now at 11 a.m.
Oh, at least my third. I am addicted to coffee, so the technology is truly amazing. I'm hearing you more clearly than often. We talk to people in this country by phone. Dave connects with them by phone, and I Skype in, and the telephone system doesn't work nearly as well as Skyping. So here we are.
Absolutely. Also, it sounds like you're right next door.
Well, I wish I were. Anyway, we had left off, we were talking about that moment or moments when the soul is confronting the light and is invited, basically, it sounded like to me, into the light, and yet doesn't go into the light, even though voices afterwards still give them a chance. Why would a soul opt not to join with God? What are the psychological reasons for that?
Oh, wow, Lee, you're asking the million-dollar question here. I mean, I can only answer that question with what I've read or what I've heard from various literatures, and deduce what what I can logically from my frame of consciousness that I'm looking at it from, which is human being and human body. I can only answer the question from that perspective, from that human perspective. And I suspect that this answer needs a perspective much, much more elevated than what I'm actually going to be able to give you. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead does have some answers to that question, because it says that if you are not practiced, in other words, if you have not habituated yourself to the sort of meditation experiences, or rather, because we're not actually searching for experiences per se, but the state of mind that you would be in, or you would find yourself in when you go beyond the physical body at that point of death, then if you're not habituated to that state of mind, then it may be that this state of light is so awe-inspiring that you actually flee away from it in terror because it's just too powerful. And I think that brings us to another point, and I don't want to go off tangent here, but I think this brings us to another point, that we do this to our own psychological self in life, that we are actually so powerful as beings. Each one of us has this potential to be so powerful that we also flee away from our own potential. And this is, as it's written in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is almost like an allegory for that psychology that we face in a very realistic day-to-day way.
Mm. What would be the powerful enlightenment that we could experience in this life that compares to the light that we've been talking about?
Well, I think, again, from a day-to-day point of view, if we can retain that state of mind that is beyond the getting fixated into emotions or sensations, then that is what will naturally protect us from being touched by all the various moods, emotional states, and reactions that we as human beings are constantly that's constantly occurring to us just without us even consciously doing it. I mean, somebody comes to you and says something nasty, and then you react. It's like, what the hell? What are you saying to me? Without even thinking. So with more conscious awareness of how we are reacting, and also managing our emotional states, and allowing ourselves to see that those emotions and sensations and feelings and reactions are only really coming out of that same space all the time. They're rising and dissolving like waves in the ocean, as is said in the texts. So if we can go beyond those states of mind which will harm us and cause us suffering, then that in itself is almost like a state of mind. I don't want to call it enlightenment, because I haven't got a clue what that really means, as in from my human consciousness point of view. I can only take huge guesses at what it could possibly mean to be enlightened. But if we can spare ourselves the suffering of day to day and moment by moment conscious kind of combating ourselves with our own conscious reactions, then we're already in a very good space. But it does take conscious awareness to do that, of retaining this ability to see where we are at any moment of our life, and I'm just talking about our day-to-day existence, going to the shops or driving the car or cooking a meal.
Right.
All the time we've got these thoughts and emotions going on in our head, and
Susan,
need to manage.
Would you say that karma then is our psychological condition, as opposed to the collection of deeds and actions that we've done during our lives?
Sorry, did you say a cycle?
No. Would you define karma as being a psychological condition, as opposed?
Sorry, I heard you say cycle. Condition.
Psychological condition, as opposed to just the things that we do, the actions that we do during our lives, or is it a combination of both?
Well, I mean, if you think of every type of feeling, sensation, or emotional thought as a kind of frequency, let's bring it into scientific terms here. If you think of it as a kind of frequency that you're emitting, that is going to have a reaction back upon you, that same whatever you are emitting is going to return to you, then it's something which is so honest and can never ever be cheated in that sense, because whatever we give out is going to come back to us, and we cannot ever deny what comes back to us as something separate from what we have created ourselves. And this is a big problem, because we don't like to admit that we are at fault, and that's understandable because of our sense of pride, or our sense of not wanting to admit to our own faults. But at the same time, this reaction that we are receiving all the time is we try and blame it on somebody else, so then we become victims. But that at the same time is also, we're digging our own hole. We're digging our own suffering by analyzing what is actually our own result, the result of our own actions, as whereas we're now, it's like the opposite end of ego, the state of victimization. It's not my fault. Somebody else did it to me. Poor me, poor me, poor me. But whereas, taking responsibility for our emotional state or our feelings, our sensations, then we say, this is my responsibility. I am creating this. I am emanating this frequency or these various frequencies out into the space around me. And whatever I'm emanating out there is going to return to me from this giant mirror that is placed around me, a mirror in the sense that whatever I'm putting into that into my world, so the people and characters around me, the environment around me, is going to reflect that back to me. And we do it automatically to each other. It's not like we contrive to say, oh no, that person's acting like this today, I have to do that. Because it's on such an energetic level, then it's always going to come back to us. And in fact, the Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about this in its appraisal of samsara meaning the world within which we are caught by our illusionary perception of the world being something solid and tangible and something that's really existing outside of our own perception of it. We are overlaying onto almost a blank sheet of paper. We are overlaying our own perception of it and creating an entire reality out of it, whereby if we stand back, as the Tibetan Book of the Dead tells us, if we stand outside of these 6 realms, that it divides this whole region of samsara, which is basically an allegory for all our emotional states, then we can retain this more, I hesitate to use the word neutral state of mind, because it's not a nothing state of mind, but it's a state of mind which is fully aware of its position within the space that it's occupying, and is no longer grasping or fixating to any particular aspect of it. And therefore it can move through it very, very smoothly without without getting the suffering that it would, when I say it, I mean consciousness, that it would experience if it were looking at it like something really out to get it. And that comes back to the victimization again, the feeling that somebody else is to blame for all your problems.
Right.
I know I was getting a little bit esoteric there, but it was it's really the only way to describe it.
When you talk about there are 6 paths through the Bardo, are they separate paths, or do we have the capacity to travel them all simultaneously?
It's a very good question. The 6 realms, per se, rather than paths, are like zones within our own mind that are created by emotional states that fit almost like within that bandwidth of frequency. So there are 6 realms. First, the highest realm of those 6 realms is the God's realm. And that doesn't mean, a bunch of gods sitting around like, deities in the sky on fluffy clouds. This is a state of mind that we experience when we're in intense pride, or we're in intense self-absorption, or we're in a kind of state where we think we're beyond everything else. I mean, a lot of spiritual practitioners can easily fall into the God's realm, because there's this idea of really blissed out state that, but still you see there's a fixation on that blissed out state. So it's not beyond. The next layer, or the next level down, would be the demigod realm. Now, the demigods, they're very competitive and jealous, and actually they'd like to be in the position of the gods, but they're not quite there. So there's always this kind of aggression and fight and idea of competitiveness. Then the human realm, which is passion and desire, and also, this suffering of change. We don't like to change. We do change, but we get habitually used to these cycles of situations when we become very comfortable and there's a false sense of security. Then we desire. We have a lot of passion, a lot of desire. But we have become a human because we've also got very good qualities. We've developed a patience, a level of patience and compassion that, and this is an energetic frequency that we would have had in order to be able to match with the frequency of a human physical body, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. Then there's the animal realm, which is largely dominated by paranoia, fear, ignorance, and the hungry ghost realm, which is largely dominated by miserliness and greed. You've got this image in the Tibetan Book of the Dead of these hungry ghosts with enormous heads and huge, huge mouths, and then these tiny, thin little throats and pipe down to the stomach, and then these like huge pipes. The mouths are very, very small and the stomachs are very, 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 very large. So, they're trying, they want all these things. They're desperately searching, hungry for anything and everything. But even when they get it, they can't consume it because the mouth is so small and the pipe down to the stomach is so small. But the stomach is so huge that it's still kind of yearning for all these things. All these, there's a kind of allegory of the food, but it's like it could pertain to anything. Right. But then when they have it, they also don't want to share any of it. They want to keep it all for themselves. So there's a sense of miserliness and greed. Then there's the hell realms, and the hell realms are dominated by anger and hatred and misery. And again, not all the beings in the hell realms are bad as such. And when you're in a hell realm state of mind, you're not a bad person as such. It's not like you're a murderer or thinking really nasty deeds, but you're in this sense of real miserable, sort of soaked in misery, and it's almost like a state of depression as well. There's just no more confidence or no more energy for living in that sense. So each of these 6 realms, which have amazing visual content, they're described in a way that's you can really go to town with if you're doing a multimedia exposure of it, which is what I'm doing, because there's so much allegory and imagery that's really very, very pertinent and means that gives off a very, very good and correct meaning to what it's trying to say. So these are the 6 realms. Then you've also got the Bardos, and last week I mentioned the various Bardos, and the Bardos really show the cycle of our existence from being in the Bardo of life and through the various Bardos after death, dying and after death, and then being reborn again. 6 Bardos are mentioned in particular, and these Bardo states are occurring within not as a linear progression like it would seem if you were to read the Tibetan Book of the Dead A to Z, but they are also occurring at any moment in our day-to-day life. For example, actually, it's a really, really good allegory of our thoughts as well. A thought is born. That's the Bardo of becoming. A thought stays a while. That's the Bardo of life. A thought dies. That's the Bardo of dying. Then in between one thought and another thought, there's a series of microsecond things that happen in our mind which we never see because it just flashes by far too fast, which are these visualizations of these, we talked about before last week, the peaceful and wrathful deities and the clear light. And if we are able, and this is what we habituate ourselves to doing when we're in the meditation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is to try and see this progression of consciousness into a thought, how it stays, remains a while, how it dissolves, and then to try and see the space between the last thought dissolving and the next thought arising. And those Bardo states in between the thought dying and the new thought arising is described in so much detail in the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the period between death and birth. So you see, it depends on which level we actually perceive the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's pointing to our conscious situation now in this moment. It's also pointing to this very A to Z linear process of our existence. So, and other things too. I mean, I'm only citing several examples here. So you see, as we go into the book in more detail, and as we read it again and again, we start to notice all these different symbols and connections it has with our moment by moment, day-to-day existence. And this is really what I want to show in my multimedia projects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I'm not so interested in just showing an A to Z linear process of our existence. I mean, that may come into it in one way, but I'm more keen in getting people to immersively experience themselves in this moment of now and the psychological process that is occurring, whether it be through showing biofeedback in the brain or heart rate variability or pulse rate, or there are various other ways. I mean, there's even, we can get into some more debatable ways of, for example, measuring the aura or other things. But a lot of people are very interested in this, and they like to see how their entire bio state is, and to be able to experience where they are in their reality in this moment, and how that is affecting their own existence.
So the technology that you're envisioning, is this a personal experience? It's not like an audience experience where people go to a movie and see something that tells them about the Book of the Dead. This is something that's going to it's a one-on-one event as you see it?
Well, I have, like I said, I've got various different projects in mind, but one of the projects that I do have in mind is this very immersive experience where people will be able to see from their own biofeedback their own personal situation within a setting that could be a virtual reality experience, or even could be a contrived environment, like a space of a room which has certain items set up in a certain way, and that they would experience their own reaction and their own consciousness as they're moving through, whether it be a virtual reality experience or, as I said, this environment which would provoke certain reactions, and then see moment by moment their reactions and how their consciousness is in that moment according to the environment that they're in, and how then they can see how they personally perceive this, or it may be unexpected to them how certain reactions will come back at them. I believe that an immersive experience is much more powerful than just seeing something, even a 3D film, which could be going on around you in a 360-degree manner. Still, there's a sense of that there is an immersive experience in that sense, but there is a sense of being removed from that. If you are yourself in an environment and having your own feedback measured, and at the same time being able to experience how that is again fed back into the environment. So it becomes like a loop. So you react to the environment, you see how you are reacting to the environment, and that feeds your own feedback back into the environment. So you're continuously combating your own feedback, if you see what I mean. It's like a loop.
You know, it sounds to me like, now you studied with Buddhist masters for many years. It sounds almost like a technological Buddhist master.
Wow. That would be, that would really be something amazing to have, as in a person who could do that for you. But as with any kind of self-development or spiritual progress, the only person who can really, who can really help us is ourselves. I mean, we can get guidance on the path, but ultimately the only person who can really advance themselves on the path is through your own endeavors. And I think this is also really important to point out, because we spend so much time in denial of our own faults by blaming others, but then on the other hand we become victims, which also keeps us in a certain frequency of our energetic frequency is very very base level when we're victims. We can never come out of that state. And so we really, really need to be honest. We really, really need to look in the mirror. And what I want to create is something that causes us to do that, and at the same, without being nasty, say, "Hey, look at who you are. You're so bad." I mean, not like that. Not at all. It's not for that kind of result. It's really to say, actually to see how marvelous you are. You may have thought that you didn't have this kind of capacity, but look at the capacity that you do have. So it's almost like boot is on the other foot. It's like saying to people, you have all this wonderful equipment, your mind and your human body, which together, when your mind and your body come together, you have this potential to experience what it is to really firstly be a human being, and also to go beyond that state, which is described in various spiritual texts, including the Tibetan Book of the Dead. In the case of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's called the clear light experience, which, as we mentioned last week, it's described as if it were a child leaping into his or her mother's arms. I mean, there's that level of familiarity. So we know this state of mind, and we understand what it is when we meet it. So coming back to your original question of why would anybody run away from this beautiful state of mind? And I'll repeat what I said in the beginning, is because ultimately we are too afraid to be the wonderful being that we actually are. And therefore, being afraid of our own power, we run away from it, and we hide in these little spaces of victim or emotion or this and that, which keeps us entrapped inside this cycle that we don't get released from until we see it for what it really, really is.
Do you think when your technology is perfected that you could prepare people to not be afraid of the light, but to go into the light at their death?
That would be incredible, and I would wish that technology would be able to simulate that. But in order to simulate it, you see, technology doesn't have its own capacity. We as humans have to code the technology. So we can only code what we know. And to code something like a clear light state would be, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I just don't see how it could be possible to know that state and for human beings to be able to actually put that state into a technological device. I think the best it will do, and this would be incredible if we could get this far, would be to provoke people to realize that they have this, and to actually show how close it is to our everyday moment by moment experience, and that it's quite possible to stay out of this realm of suffering through seeing through the illusion of what our emotions, feelings, sensations really are, that they are there, but also where are they coming from? They're coming ultimately from in and out of this beautiful space. So again, it's kind of habit. It's habituating yourself to seeing your own existence as that, rather than this collection of gross material things and experiences that we have to have in life, which we can have as well. I'm not denying that. I'm saying let's have everything, but let's see let's see it for what it really is, so that it doesn't harm us. Exactly. Otherwise, it's going to come and bite us and sting us. So
Susan,
this would be a great end.
Susan, I'm sorry to say that we are out of time again.
Oh my goodness. Really, that went by at such a...
So fast. Please tell people how to find your website.
Yeah, all my books and my films, my writings and events and other things that I've taken part in are all to be found on my website, which is www.pyramidkey.com, as in pyramid, Egypt, Mexican pyramids, key as in key to the door. So regular pyramid key, pyramidkey.com. That's it.
Thank you so much for doing this. This has been fascinating. If listeners would like to hear the show again or any of our past shows, and I would urge you to go back and listen to our first interview last week with Susan, go to our website at nderadio.org and hit the past shows button. For information about IANDS, go to their website at IANDS.org and be with us again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern for more NDE Radio. This is your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.